All right, Alexander, let's talk about what is happening in Ukraine, specifically what's going on with the Zelensky administration. It looks like we are going to have elections in May 2025. Zelensky's administration, they seem to be denying this. They haven't. I don't think they've issued an outright denial. I'm not sure, but they're trying to say no, we're not going to have elections. I mean, there's the Russian government doesn't believe that Zelensky is the elected president anyway. That's what the Russian government believes. But we're getting reports specifically from the Economist, the neocon Economist, which is saying, yeah, there's going to be elections in May. And then we have the Times reporting about Zelensky pursuing a nuclear weapon, actually a bomb similar to what was dropped on Nagasaki. I believe it's called the Fat Man bomb. They have material, according to the Times and the think tank in Ukraine that they've discussed this with. Yeah. They have the material to build these types of bombs, but they can't build the nuclear weapons. They don't have the capabilities to build the nuclear missiles that Russia, the U.S. Possess, but they can build these types of Fat Man bombs, which would do a lot of damage, obviously, very dangerous weapons. But the condition, according to the Times, is we get into NATO or else. Once again, we're getting this narrative. We get into NATO or else. Once again, the Zelensky administration is denying this. Yes, they deny it, but you get the sense that this is really happening as well. So anyway, what are your thoughts with the rumors about the election, the panic in the Zelensky administration, the this nuclear bomb that the Times of the UK is reporting on? By the way, the same Economist, Alexander, reported that the generals, the military officials in the Ukraine military, that they're not giving Zelensky a clear picture as to what's happening on the front line as well. They're keeping him in the dark. That was also interesting, once again, from The Economist. Yeah. Your thoughts?
Right, there's an awful lot here to discuss, but let's say the whole thing simply. What we're looking at is the beginning of the end of Project Ukraine. The United States, and this isn't just the Trump administration. We'd already started to see the first signs of that under, extraordinarily, the Biden administration itself. The Pentagon refusing to authorize deep missile strikes into Russia. Ramstein being called off. The peace conference that Zelensky was trying to organize being called off. And now we have all of these new moves taking place. And it is a very, very complex situation. But what you basically see is that the Americans are preparing now to walk away. And in the meantime, around them, as the Americans make that decision, all the cards are being shuffled. And we don't know quite how the cards are going to fall, but they're being shuffled as part of this end game. So let's first start with the elections. The most interesting thing about this story is that the first indicator that this was coming came from Russia. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, about a week ago issued a statement, an analysis, which said that the Americans were preparing elections in Ukraine in May, that various NGOs and other parties in Ukraine were working to organize and prepare for this. The intention was to set up a pro-American party. I mean, all very intriguing. By the way, this report came, as I remember, it came out before the election, just to say. And that there's an attempt being made, in effect, to basically push Zelensky out and to replace him with a more pro-American, more malleable figure. And of course, the SVR didn't tell us who that person was, but I think it is fairly clear that the Russians think the Russian view is that this person is going to be Zelensky. And now we've had reports from The Economist and other sections of the media that tell us exactly the same thing. That and this is how the Western media are saying this, and some sections, some media outlets in Ukraine as well, that elections are even being organized on a local level. This is all being done despite the fact that Zelensky himself is rejecting this completely, but that the elections are already being organized, that May is being set out as the date for this to happen. The Economist went on to say that there's even suggestions that the best thing for Zelensky to do in advance of those elections is to step down and go back to his original promise that he's only going to be a one-term president. So it looks as if these are going to be elections in which a candidate, Zelensky, is going to be proposed and he's going to be voted into power by acclamation, essentially. So this seems to be in the works. And some people, the SVR says it's the Americans, and I'm sure they're right, or at least some people in the United States are busy organizing this in order basically to replace Zelensky with somebody who is more attuned with Western or at least American thinking. And all of this is happening even as The Economist, which is very, very well connected with thinking within the American political intelligence and other elites, is now passing on to us information about Zelensky himself, very damaging to Zelensky, that Zelensky lives inside his own world. He doesn't know what is really going on. His generals have given up telling him the truth and are lying to him, pretending to him that the situation on the battlegrounds is far less bad than it really is. It makes Zelensky look, and by the way, I'm sure this is true, as a completely lonely figure, completely cut off from reality, slightly crazy, out of touch, clearly somebody who's basically played out. Now, I think that all this is partly connected to Trump's election, but I think it's also independent of it. In other words, I don't think Trump himself or the new administration that's coming have anything directly to do with any of this. I think the people who are doing this because they understand that America is shifting away from Ukraine. They already started to do this before the election. They want to push forward with the freeze idea. They understand that Zelensky himself will never go along with it. And so they're trying to find some way to get Zelensky out, bring Zelensky in. The idea is, I think, to present Trump with a new president who will be Zelensky. Zelensky will support the freeze idea. And the hope is that will then enable the Ukrainians to keep going and to bring Trump back on side in some way. That is how it all looks to me. It's complicated and one doesn't quite understand all of the moves that are being played. But I suspect, the Poroshenko, Klitschko, Zelensky faction in Kiev is playing a certain role here. I think some people in the intelligence agencies in the US are also playing a role here. And I think this is being done independently of Trump. They understand that the war is lost. They're trying to find some way, some mechanism to get the freeze concept, the freeze idea implemented. They understand that Zelensky will never agree to it. So they're trying to leverage Zelensky into place in place of Zelensky. So that's one side of the story. Zelensky himself is back to his game of a few weeks ago, the one we know that he tried to pull on Donald Trump during their meeting in Washington, which is that he's basically trying to blackmail Donald Trump by saying, unless you go on supporting me, I will go nuclear. I've got all the means at my disposal to create nuclear weapons. I've got 7 tons of plutonium rods. I can make lots of nuclear weapons, nuclear bombs that way. Obviously, they'll be fairly crude, but I can start waging nuclear war against the Russians, and I'm going to be able to do that in just a few months. So Zelensky said that to Trump back in September. And we've now had a briefing paper from some kind of think tank in Ukraine connected to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry that's coming up and saying the same thing. Remember, it was denied before. Zelensky retracted it. Now we see that that story has been revived. And to anybody who doubts it, just go to the London Times. You'll find a whole discussion of it in extraordinary detail there, explaining exactly how they're going to make this bomb and the fact that they can do it in this extremely narrow time frame. I don't believe, by the way, that any of that is actually possible. And it is incredible that the Ukrainians are even talking in this way. But to be very clear, this is not about threatening the Russians. It is ultimately about blackmailing Donald Trump and the United States. Keep giving us everything we want, weapons, money, all those things. Otherwise, you get a nuclear war on your hands.
Probably not the best idea to to start blackmailing Trump.
No,
I don't know.
it's a
I wouldn't suggest it
idea.
if I was advising Zelensky. I would not suggest this, but he's desperate. He's panicking.
He is desperate. He's desperate. And I mean, he must be aware at some level of all of these maneuvers taking place. He's undoubtedly got people who read The Economist. So he's also very, very frightened, I'm sure. And desperate people say and do desperate things. So this is what we're seeing with this nuclear plan.
Yeah. Interesting that he uses the UK Times to
Absolutely.
to get this information out. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Given the UK's role in Ukraine, their support, their continued support for Ukraine, and the reports that Stammer continues to try and find a way, along with Macron, to try and find a way to get Trump to get Biden to green light long range missiles into Ukraine, and to also try and get Trump to support their views on Ukraine. I mean, Stammer is not giving up.
No, they're not giving up, and neither are the Europeans. I think this is the other big story at the moment, because even as all of these moves are taking place in Ukraine, the reality, let me repeat again, the reality is that the United States, for entirely pragmatic, great power reasons, just to make this clear, it's not that, the Americans have suddenly become peaceniks and that they realize that some terrible crime was committed in Ukraine and, that they've develop remorse over it or anything of that kind. The United States has decided to close down Project Ukraine because Project Ukraine has failed. It's just as simple as this. Trump could see it. He was one of the first to see it. But even other sections of the American political, military and security state can see it too. So this is what is happening at the moment. The Ukrainians are trying to maneuver around this. As I said, they're trying to find some way to replace Zelensky because they realize that if he stays, he's just going to remain dogmatic and doctrinaire, and he's going to pull them all down. Zelensky himself is wanting to stay and wants to get the Americans still on side, so he's trying to blackmail them, and specifically Donald Trump, by conjuring up this nuclear, phantom. And the Europeans and the British are in total denial about everything. They're doing everything they possibly can to keep Ukraine going, to keep shoveling money at Ukraine. The Europeans now, the EU is changing completely the rules on its structural funds. I mean, it's incredible that they should do something like this. It's something that really, when you know how important the structural funds are to the whole EU project, I mean, they are what financially binds it all together. It's the payoff that's given to people at the political classes in various parts of Europe. But apparently the structural funds are going to be redirected towards defense spending and towards assisting Ukraine. And they want to press forward with the $50 billion loan, even though Orban has said that without the Americans, it makes no sense. And of course, he's right. And Borrell is now talking about seizing all of the Russian assets. He's coming up. Yeah. He's coming up with that as well. And the British are making their media available so that Zelensky can publish all his threats to scare supposedly Donald Trump. It's quite extraordinary how obsessed the Europeans are with this. And anyway, they're not giving up. My sense is, by the way, that the Europeans, on balance, still support Zelensky. They still want him to keep going because from their point of view, far better to have the war and the Americans in and involved than even to have a freeze, which might lead to the Americans walking away. From a European point of view, the priority now, I think, is less enabling Ukraine to win than to keep the Americans still in Europe, which is now, as I said, priority number one for them. But maybe you shouldn't look too much thinking and too much planning because, Ursula or Scholz, Macron, Merz, Starmer, all of them are so wedded, so much in love with Project Ukraine, that it's clear that they're never going to give it up.
Yeah, and Blinken was in Brussels meeting with the EU leaders and the NATO leaders. What do you think that was about?
Well,
trying to plot ways to keep Ukraine going?
Absolutely. That's exactly
as he exits.
That is exactly what it's all about. I mean, that is exactly what Blinken is as wedded to Project Ukraine as any European leader is. I mean, he's equally obsessed with it. I mean, he lobbied, as we know, for the deep strikes against Russia, deep missile strikes against Russia, going against Jake Sullivan on that one. So Blinken is busy trying to get the Europeans to stay on board with this. And of course, the Europeans are only too willing to listen to him because that's their overriding priority at the moment. And, Borrell now is talking about converting the European Union from an economic association into a military one as well, which, by the way, would guarantee that the Russians will reverse their current position that Ukraine cannot join NATO, but can join the EU. If the EU becomes a military alliance, then, of course, the Russians will say Ukraine can't join it. A fact which nobody seems to point it out to Borrell. But it's, well, I mean, I think it's all to a great extent already the case.
Collis is not going to be any more moderate than, she's going to be just as crazy as Borrell, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Collis is going to become the foreign minister after Borrell.
Absolutely. I mean, if anything, even more so. But anyway, they are pulling every stop to try and help Ukraine. Even though, as Orban, Seattle, and Fico are pointing out, without the Americans, this is nonsense. It simply won't fly. But we're looking, coming back to my original points at the start of this program, all of these maneuvers in Kiev, the maneuvers by the intelligence agencies and all those people in the US who are backing these regime change operations in Kiev, which is what they are, Zelensky's threats about nuclear weapons, even what the Europeans are doing. What all that tells us is that we're now in the end game, that they all, at some level, know that this game, Project Ukraine, is lost. They're just in their own different ways, trying to save something from the wreckage. And the Russians, in the meantime, watch all this to just press on, because I don't think the Russians are going to stop, and I don't think they're in the mood to negotiate at all. Lavrov has just spoken about this, and he sounded completely implacable to me.
Yeah, especially not with the Europeans.
Well, what with the Europeans?
With the US, yeah, with the Europeans.
No, absolutely.
We have no desire to talk to the Europeans at all.
Absolutely. And of course, the Russians also read the Times. And they're reading how Ukraine is planning to develop nuclear weapons and launch them against Russia. And of course, they're going to be reading all of that. And they say, we absolutely cannot make peace with these people. It is a ridiculous idea. And I'm sure that will hold.
Yeah. All right. We will end the video there. TheDuran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and X. And go to the Duran shop, pick up some merch like what we are wearing in this video. The link to the Duran shop is in the description box down below. Take care.